These are the top 3 placement mistakes I guarantee are losing your games. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first mistake I see people making is not protecting their ability troops. So let's take an example here. Let's look at Clan Avengers. Let's say this is your basic build, right? Now, what I mean by our ability troops in this case are, the Mega Knight, the Bandit, and the Queen, right? Because, they have these abilities. Now, the thing about ability troops is that these abilities tend to be their major damage dealers, right? So for the Bandit, that would be your dash, the Mega Knight his jump. So what a lot of people tend to do is they kind of just chuck all of their frontline units up here and call it a day, right? When in reality, this can actually cost you the round. Why? Because, you know, imagine they had a P.E.K.K.A here on their bandit. Well, your bandit here would just get one shotted, and well, now she can't use her ability, right? Because she's dead, and she's your major damage dealer in terms of melee. So, what I like to do in a lot of cases is kind of do something more like this, right? Where I'd have my aggro, my Valkyrie take the aggro, so my bandit here is protected, and she can walk up. And then while the Valkyrie is taking all the hits, she can get her dashes in and her ability in, and then just wipe out the entire pack line. So the thing you need to know here is you need to prioritize your ability troops because all of these other troops that don't have abilities, they can just tank. Why? Because, well, they're not really any major damage dealers, right? These are your major damage dealers, the troops with the abilities and the troops that are going to make more of an impact than these. So you want these to stay alive rather than these. Even for the Mega Knight, a lot of people think the Mega Knight is just tanky and you can just put him anywhere and he'll just survive and get a few jumps in. Honestly, this is debatable, but I personally might even do something like this, right? Where or like this, where my Mega Knight is protected in some cases. Why? Because, well, again, these units don't have abilities. They're just kind of like meat shields. They're just tanks, right? While your Mega Knight, while he is tanky, you want him to get as many jumps in as possible to do as much, damage and stun to the enemies as possible while your backline troops can keep shooting him while they're stunned. So, yeah, while in this case, the Valk's going to take more damage, I'd rather have, a full HP Mega Knight and a lower Valkyrie than, a half HP Valkyrie and Mega Knight. So that my Mega Knight can get more jumps and do more damage to their backline. Another example of an ability troop here is the Goblin Machine. The Goblin Machine doesn't get his damage in from his melee hits. He gets his damage in from his missiles. So it's very important to protect him. Why? Because if he dies early, then he doesn't do any missiles. So how you should think about these ability troops is you want your other troops to stall while these guys stay alive on the board as much as possible so that they can use their abilities for as long as possible. So for example, let's say they had like a P.E.K.K.A here or a P.E.K.K.A here, right? And your machine was initially here. I would even just make the machine fall back so the P.E.K.K.A can fall here and just hit your Valkyrie while your machine can take his hits and then keep spewing out missiles and just doing crazy damage to all the other troops. You got to think that these abilities get them more value than their actual melee hits. So the second mistake I see people making is not knowing their troops' ranges. So what do I mean by this? Let's take the Archer Queen for example. If you place the Archer Queen in the furthest lane, she can only target the front line. And the thing with the Archer Queen is that she can attack multiple units. So let's say they only had one tank. Well, then she'd only be using one arrow. Whereas if you put her up like this and they had more troops, let's say slightly further back, she would be able to attack multiple at once, and you'd get much more value from the Archer Queen in that case. Also, let's say they have a backline here, Rangers. If you place the Queen here, she can't target them, right? And in a lot of cases, like if you're going against Rangers, you want to take out their backline first because the backline are their main damage dealers. So if you knew the range of the Archer Queen, then you would know that you can place her in either of these first two lanes, and then she would be in range of attacking the backline, right? So by knowing each card's range, you can know which troops she can and cannot attack, and you can use that and you can take advantage of that to kind of pick what troops you want her to attack. Same thing with, let's say, the princess, right? Where's the princess? The princess, if she's placed in the furthest lane, can attack anywhere up to the second furthest lane on the opponent's side. And because the princess attacks the furthest unit in its range, we can use the opponent's princess's range to our advantage. So, for example, let's say the opponent is a princess in the furthest lane. Because we know the princess can only attack up to this lane and that she will attack the furthest unit, we can place a dummy here. And we can basically pick what card the princess attacks. So now that we chose the dummy for the princess to attack, our front line here will not get splashed. Same thing for, let's say, a spear goblin. If you place a spear goblin in the furthest lane, he has to walk up and then he can start shooting the front line, which, takes like a second or two, which is a bit of damage, that you could have saved. So let's say if you place a spear goblin here, then he can instantly start shooting and that'll save you a bit of damage. So it's just those little placement, those little range knowledge can definitely save you some damage in each round. The biggest placement mistake I see people making is not checking their opponents enough. And by enough, I mean every round. You should be checking your opponents every single round right before the battle starts. Why? Because the reason placement is so important is because you want to counter your opponent's placement. So, what do I mean by this? Let's say, we check our opponent and he has a P.E.K.K.A. in this spot. Again, like I mentioned earlier, your bandit versus their P.E.K.K.A., not very good. So, when you look at your opponent and you see that their P.E.K.K.A. will be here, you want to change your placement, okay? You always want to look at your opponent's placement and change your placement to counter theirs. So something I might do in this case if they had a P.E.K.K.A. there is I might even do this. Switch my Valkyrie so that the P.E.K.K.A. walks down and my bandit hits them. And my bandit gets more dashes. Do you see how that little thing is much better than just having your bandit get killed? And what a lot of people tend to do is they tend to just chuck down this like a default formation. Let's say, like for Clan Avengers, it would be something like this. Just chuck down a default formation and be like, you know what, that's good enough, right? We have a range in the back and we have a front line here. But what a lot of people fail to recognize is the little nuances in their front line. You want to choose exactly which unit each of your frontline members go against and have those matchups be positive for you. Have those individual matchups be positive. So again, let's look at our P.E.K.K.A. v Bandit example. The enemy P.E.K.K.A. against our Bandit is bad, right? Because the P.E.K.K.A. will do crazy damage to our Bandit, preventing our Bandit from fully maximizing her ability usage and doing, as much damage as she can, right? So a counter to this, let's say, is I can just, put the Bandit back, right? Then the P.E.K.K.A. would have to go for the Valkyrie. And our Valkyrie against their P.E.K.K.A. is a very good matchup. Why? Because our Valkyrie is so tanky, and our Barb and our Bandit can help clean up this P.E.K.K.A. while our Valkyrie tanks. So you want to be looking at these individual matchups of your front line, and you want to pick these matchups to be favorable to you. Another example, let's say, is they're running Assassin. Then, of course, you'd want to run this, anti-assassin placement so that you can choose which squares their assassins land on, and you can have a much easier time defending their push, and so that you will not get countered by it. Now, if you hadn't checked your opponent that round, you wouldn't know that this assassin push would be coming, right? And then let's say your assassins would land here, your archer would be immediately dead, your queen would, early ability, and that's not something you'd always want. Placement can make or break rounds in most cases, so it's very important to learn. Now, of course, there are some niche placements like the anti assassin, but for the most part, those three concepts I talked about can easily carry you to diamond. Thank you guys for watching this guide, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.